1. 1,000 versts, or miles, or kilometers east of Moscow, a skeletal frame of a radar station, weakly illuminated by the constant beam of light from the light bulb factory, jutted into the night sky. This march was mild, with temperatures just below zero, and the sandy wasteland was covered with dirty snow. The snow shimmered on the crest of the sharply sloped riverbank, and pale stars were set against the horizon, which made for a pretty sight. And below, Yanka knew the tar-black river carried everything along in its current, even time itself. Yanka sat down on a tree stump. She pulled up her zipper on her parka and lit a cigarette. Her hand smelled sour, like metal. At the start of the night shift, the foreman had made an announcement to the workers, raising high a transistor radio that was blaring Chopin's funeral march. "You know what this means," he'd shouted, and declared that there was no reason to give up. Now, more than ever, the Soviet Union needed light. 2 more hours until sunrise. Yanka threw her cigarette away and watched the embers die in the icy sand. Two. Matvey Alexandrovich woke with a start to the sounds of clattering and scraping in the corridor. He fumbled for his wristwatch on his nightstand, and Gagarin slipped off his chest. Wasn't even 5:30 yet. Matvey hoped Yanka wouldn't wake her child straight away, as she usually did after her night shift. The whining would severely disturb his morning rituals. He listened and stroked Gagarin behind his ears. Over the past years, the old tomcat's fur had lost its sheen, and Matvey had feared Gagarin would die, but the cat wouldn't even consider it. Matvey Alexandrovich stood up and turned on the radio. They were playing the third movement of Chopin's Piano Sonata No. 2, the funeral march. He turned down the volume, positioned himself next to the bed in his underwear, stood on the tips of his toes, ready to begin his daily set of gymnastic exercises, and then little Kroshka began to howl. Matvey sank down on his heels and listened. The child was silent again. There was still a slim chance she hadn't woken everyone up, and they wouldn't appear in the communal kitchen in a few moments. Matvey Alexandrovich threw on his dressing gown and slippers, cleared his room in 2 steps, and crept out. He paused briefly in the corridor. In the professor's room, it sounded as if someone were coughing into the bell of a tuba. A large pot with rice and meat stood on the carescent stove. Without bothering to turn on the light, he picked up a spoon and ate directly from the pot. The meat tasted delicate, like chicken. Or was it snake? But where would the carescents have gotten snake? Even in the summertime, there were only a few sad-looking slow worms in the city park. He ate a few more spoonfuls, wiped his mouth on a threadbare kitchen towel, and looked around the kitchen, which revealed the traces of its aristocratic past in the dim glow of a streetlight. 6 groups of renters lived among these crumbling turn-of-the-century mouldings and tried to keep out of each other's way as much as circumstances would allow. Matvey rarely saw the people who lived in the room at the end of the corridor, the carescents, or the old professor who lived such an inconspicuous life that Matvey always forgot his name. Midway down the corridor was Liebermann, and next to her, in the largest room of all, were the Kusulapics. Matvey had more to do with the women in the front of the apartment. Their room was opposite his. Matvey Alexandrovich put the spoon into a tub full of dirty plates and cutlery. The lack of cleanliness was a constant, tedious topic in the Kommunalka, but in the end, the Karisans always cleaned up. No one knew when they did it, and no one had ever seen them at work, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, Matvey Alexandrovich thought he could hear the Karisans going about with their dustpan, mop and broom. Next door, Yanka was drawing a bath, and that would indefinitely postpone his shave. An electric spark from the overhead wires of the 17 bus which was driving past illuminated the face of Mikhail Potapych-Toptikin, who lived on the shelf as a coin box. The inhabitants of the Kommunalka were supposed to slip a few pennies into the slot between the bear's eyes every week for shared purchases of curd soap and toilet paper. Mikhail Potapych-Toptikin always had an empty belly. But, as if by magic, the supplies were always restocked when necessary. Let that be a lesson to those who complained about their system. Matvey Alexandrovich looked out. Only one window on the street was illuminated. Everyone was still fast asleep. Perhaps, by the glows of a table lamp, 2 people were entwined on a couch in the throes of love, healthfully groaning and straining, kissing each other until sunrise. Matvey Alexandrovich sighed, then started because his sigh echoed eerily in the kitchen. He sighed again, this time more quietly. He growled a little, humbled, grumbled, hummed more loudly, and then sang, "Martyrs forever, you fell and you died. We stand here and mourn you in heart and in mind. You fought and you perished for justice to come, but we are mourning the loss of our sons." "Have the martyrs hidden themselves away in our kitchen, dear Matvey Alexandrovich?" He spun around. Before him stood Maria Nikolaevna, dressed in a pale pink dressing gown, and he didn't know whether it was a sudden impulse or the blonde locks which fell down to Maria Nikolaevna's shoulders, blonde locks that she pulled back into a stern bun each day, or whether it was the collar of her nightdress which showed from underneath her dressing gown. But he grasped Maria Nikolaevna by her shoulders and belted the next verse of the song into her face as if there were no tomorrow. One day, though, when freedom to mankind arrives, we finish the longing with which you did strive. Then we will extol you and all your brave lives for the highest of mankind, so we could all thrive. Matvey, calm down. I'll make us some tea. I have some chocolates too. I was saving them for my mother's birthday, but you seem to need them rather badly right now. If I'd known that a patriotic song would grant me the pleasure of your company and some chocolates, I would have taken this measure long ago. Maria Nikolaevna turned on the light and set to work at the stove. Matvey Alexandrovich examined her ankles, which were visible as a small white stripe between the hem of her dressing gown and the fake fur cuffs of her slippers. He let himself sink into a chair. No star or sun had the right to intrude into someone else's orbit and cause the unforeseeable consequences that manifest themselves in the dreadful disorder of his thoughts. You know, Maria Nikolaevna, every person lives in their own separate world. That's a fact. And it seems fair and right to me. Your daughter, Yanka, however, lives in a particularly foreign and distant cosmos. Does that give her the right to be selfish and wake her child when she comes home from her night shift at dawn, which then blubbers and cries and rudely awakens the entire communalka? Our lives are shit, Maria Nikolaevna answered. She handed Matvey a cup of tea, sat down with him at the table and bent over the box of chocolates. But then she seemed to realize that the statement, which she enjoyed saying often, was inappropriate at this moment. As she quickly added, "But not for long, because spring will come soon and the birch trees will have small green leaves." When it comes to trees, I'll admit that when you talk about the bark of a mountain ash or an alder tree, or the colour of birch leaf, I feel as though you're not talking about trees, but about me. I'm flattered by how sweetly you talk about the trees, which lead such quiet, noble lives. Let me tell you one more thing, but don't make fun of me. 30 years ago, my younger self would never have imagined how melancholic I would become when I think about those trees. Maria Nikolaevna yawned, big, loud, and beautiful. She got up, took the kettle off the stove, pushed aside the laundry, which hung from several lines that were strung up across the kitchen, and finally asked, lost in thought, "Trees, you say? You're reading too much Turgenev." A radio was turned on at the far end of the apartment, and the final strains of Chopin's funeral march rang out, and then a choir intoned, "Martyrs forever, you fell and you died." And the radio was turned off again. "Yes, trees," said Matvey Alexandrovich, who suddenly felt very tired. "If you like, I'll take you for a walk in the park next Sunday and show them to you." "Oh, Matvey, there's no need. Who knows whether the trees aren't in mourning too and will make for a sad sight." "What do you mean, Maria Nikolaevna?" "It's clear. Someone in Moscow has died. By the way, do you have the time?" "The time? What time is it?" Almost 6:30. I don't think that the trees are in mourning, except for the willows, of course. Elms and birches naturally have a cheerful, light-hearted disposition. Oaks can sometimes be a bit stern, but mourning? We mourned for Stalin, we mourned for Brezhnev, and today? Maria Nikolaevna looked at Matvey Alexandrovich for a long time and said nothing. Then she tossed 4 lumps of sugar into another teacup and stirred it well. "Your tea, mother." Varvara Mikhailovna entered, took the teacup, looked at her daughter and said, "I'm going to die soon." "Good morning, dear Varvara Mikhailovna," said Matvey Alexandrovich. Varvara Mikhailovna grunted in reply and turned back to her daughter.
"Where's Yanka?"
"Taken a bath."
"Of course. What else? She's either bathing or screaming."
"She doesn't scream, she sings."
"And who died?" "They're playing Chopin."
Matvey Alexandrovich here suspects. As long as no official announcement has been made, I have no suspicion, bellowed Matvey Alexandrovich with unusual force. "Well, no matter who died," Maria Nikolaevna placated, "I have to get ready now. See you later."
"Watch out for the Karisans,"
said Varvara Mikhailovna. "Watch out yourself." Maria Nikolaevna, before you go, your daughter is occupying the bathroom again. We have to do something. And what should we do, dear Matvey? What do you suggest? Little Kroshka appeared on a threshold with bare feet. Varvara Mikhailovna put her on her lap, produced a pair of wool socks from her bathrobe and said,
"You'll catch a cold, child, but no one around here cares, my poor angel."
A man should talk to her, set her straight, you understand? I do, Matvey Alexandrovich, but you won't be the one to do it. Maria Nikolaevna pushed past him out of the kitchen and knocked loudly on the bathroom door. "Yanka, come out!" She tried to make her voice sound commanding. They heard Yanka sing a few more bars and then swear. "You see, there's nothing to be done here," Maria Nikolaevna called over her shoulder. 3. Yanka raised her left leg out of the lukewarm water and observed her foot, moving it in circles. It was a solid foot. She closed her eyes. Only 5 more minutes. Her limbs were heavy. The shift had felt never-ending, illuminated by thousands of blindingly bright light bulbs. Screw, check. Screw, sort. These night shifts sharpened her awareness in a peculiar way, and Yanka began to find everything meaningless. She remembered that during her break, her colleagues had stood together, chatting, and when she joined them to smoke a cigarette, they'd quickly glanced at each other and changed the topic. What were they talking about? It didn't matter. Her colleagues didn't matter. The factory didn't matter. She could be weightless, or sad, or happy and stupid. Or she could finally stop asking herself how she might be, or what she wanted to be, or what the world wanted of her. Was she useful? Or could the world get on without her? Her hand moved tentatively to her stomach, her hip. Little bubbles rose and burst to the surface. She submerged and swam towards the shore, rising up again. They were all there. Pavel, Olga, Emmy, Kostya, and Andrei. Emmy and Kostya were entwined on a blanket, devouring each other. Olga was slurring a poem by Pasternak. Andrei was watching the shashlik cook under the embers, and Pavel was standing on the shore, keeping a lookout for her. "Can one of you bastards throw me a towel?" she shouted, standing in the ice-cold water, so cold the fishes had decamped to Africa. Pavel tossed aside his shirt and pants and ran towards her, penis flapping, and wrapped her tight in his arms. "Oh, so you're my towel?" she mumbled into the hollow between his neck and collarbone. "Yes, I am." Andrei struck an athletic pose with the grill tongs and stuffed an enormous piece of bread roll into his mouth. They were surrounded by the shimmering birches, glistening water, and the sharp premonition that the summer would not be able to keep its promise of eternity. With naked Pavel clinging to her, Yanka tried to move from where she stood and trudged through the grass as if she were skiing on wet snow, step by step. "You'll break my back!" She pinched his testicles, and he finally let go and fell as if dead to the floor. Andrei tossed Yanka's shirt over to her and grinned. "What?" "Shall we sing a song, Yanka?" "For whom?" "For us." "What song do you want to sing?" Instead of an answer, he gave her a skewer with burnt onions and fatty meat and watched her mouth as she chewed. He took the pieces of fat she spurned and ate them. That's the best stuff, and you spit it out. Janka let some more hot water into the bath. It was so wonderful in the belly of the tub. Everything is still before me. Dear God, let me kiss many mouths, and let my songs be heard. That evening she would hold a concert in her kitchen, a kvarternik. Just her and her guitar in front of 10, maybe 20 people. It would get crowded if that many people came, and she still didn't have a decent instrument. A few days ago, Andrei had drunkenly stumbled into her guitar. The body had survived the kick, but the heel had split from the body, and the neck looked like it might become loose soon. Andrei had covered up his embarrassment with a joke. "You ought to thank me, Janka. It finally sounds like punk music." Pavel almost charged at Andrei. Janka calmed them down, and Andrei quietly slipped away. Pavel promised to get her a new guitar, but each time he'd come back to her with excuses. Hard to find, too expensive, not right for you. What happened to Andrei's guitar? He pawned it. Oh, well, doesn't Olga have a guitar? Olga plays the violin. Janka, I promise you for your concert, you'll have a new guitar. Pavel even claimed that the famous BG had come from Leningrad and wanted to attend her concert. Andrei didn't think much of BG. He called him a sellout and a traitor because of his Western girlfriend who had allegedly smuggled his recordings to the United States and brought him back a red Stratocaster with which he could now perform at the Leningrad Rock Club under the eyes of the KGB, but still in front of an audience and on a proper stage. But those were probably all lies. Andrei had also told her about a singer named Diagileva, who only made music for herself and didn't care whether anyone else liked her songs. But this Diagileva was probably one of the chosen few who roamed the country unafraid with a burning soul, let herself be arrested and had torrid love affairs with others in that chosen few. Janka's soul should burn too. She wanted to burn with love. Love. Be loved ardently. Would she have to play the guitar until her fingers were bloody, like Andrei? Would she have to be arrested by the police for disturbing the peace, like a Diagileva? Janka went to work obediently, and sometimes even enjoyed it because, while checking the light bulbs, she could forget about the world and compose her songs to the rhythm of the machines. By her 21st birthday, she would write an unforgettable song. Water slowly grew cold. She could hear Krushka babbling happily. Krushka, who had only just lain at her breast, amazed her. To think that so much milk could flow out of such small breasts. Once, Janka had woken up at night and felt as though Krushka wasn't breathing anymore, that she had somehow lost her breath, that their life together was already over before it had properly begun. She had imagined Krushka's small, exhausted lungs and screamed so loudly she couldn't hear her own scream, and Only when her mother and grandmother started from their sleep and Krushka's thin voice joined in the screaming had Yanka come to her senses and fallen back on her pillow.
Silly goose. She was only asleep.
If Yanka were to spend any longer in the bathtub, she wouldn't manage to get Krushka dressed for kindergarten and spend a few minutes with her. To be honest, she barely saw the child anymore. Sometimes Krushka looked at her wide-eyed, as if she were confused, as if there were a misunderstanding between her and Yanka. "Excuse me, have we been introduced? Have we met before? Somewhere?" And when Yanka admonished Krushka to do or not to do something, it felt odd, awkward, and sometimes she even felt as though she could see a flicker of scorn pass through the child's eyes. She didn't know if the scorn was really there. Maybe she was just afraid that she had nothing to offer her daughter. And then came the remorse for asking her mother to care for the child, for sleeping while her mother brought Krushka to kindergarten. Maria never refused, never said no or even complained. Sometimes Yanka noticed with alarm that her young mother had begun to grow old. She saw the traits of her grandmother in her face, the slight squint in her eyes, the twitching in one corner of her mouth. Yanka got out of the tub, dried herself off, and used the towel to wipe off the steamed-up mirror. She laughed and watched the laugh transform her face. "Shine, my little star, shine." Maria Nikolaevna folded up her bed and banged it into place with her fist. She pushed the modesty screen between the door and the wardrobe, took off her gown and her nightie, and got dressed. She flung away her slippers, which she'd slid open on the sides for comfort, and there they lay, a picture of misery. Maria lay down on Yanka's bed, pulled the curtains shut, and stared up at the ceiling. There was a little time before she had to go to leave the house. She could have just a few minutes alone. She heard pots clattering in the kitchen. She pictured Varvara digging through the dried mushrooms which were collected every summer and hung up to dry from the kitchen ceiling. They exuded a musty, earthy smell. And then she heard her mother's steps on the corridor, headed towards the toilet. In a moment, she would open the door with a sigh. She would swear because the lock still hadn't been repaired. She would take her toilet seat down from the hook on the wall and get angry that someone else had forgotten to hang up theirs. Varvara's muffled mutterings floated over, and then the sound of the flush. Yanka was singing in the bathroom. Maria had always thought that Yanka's voice seemed too big and full to belong to her delicate daughter, who would be 21 soon, and had stoically proclaimed, with dry chapped lips and eyebrows knit together, that she wasn't going to grow up. Yanka had decided to have the child, despite all the good advice she had received. "I'm going to have my baby and you'll help me with it," she declared, and stuck with her decision. Yet she'd had so little interest in practical matters. She couldn't even name the father of her child. Or perhaps she hadn't wanted to. Maria even liked some of the young men who hovered around Yanka, And she secretly picked a favourite to be Krushka's father, sometimes this one, sometimes that one. In contrast to Janka, little Krushka was a quiet, undemanding child. When she was given thick porridge with butter, she was happy. When she was put in front of the TV, she quietly gazed at the screen. If Maria kept her in the kitchen with her, she eagerly observed the goings-ons with red cheeks. The only thing she disliked was going to kindergarten. Sometimes, Janka would come home drunk from a concert or party, wake Krushka up and cry in her lap that she was a bad mother, that they'd soon have a place of their own, and so on. This frightened Krushka, and she'd break out in a rash and have little red spots on her arms and legs. And as soon as Janka got herself under control and stopped wallowing in self-pity, the red spots would disappear. Maria didn't know when Janka had discovered her love for music. Only that what Janka called music seemed like screaming to everyone else. That's what her mother called it. That's what Matvei Alexandrovich had complained about. And that's what the cultural committee said when Janka and her friends applied for a permit to perform in public. But she was moved by Janka's music, sometimes even enchanted by it. Janka's songs were somber and profound, and when she accompanied herself on the guitar, Maria could barely recognize her daughter. Janka was able to express things in her songs that Maria only mulled over in vague thoughts at night with empty catchphrases from bad movies, nothing original. Sleep had become an adventure anyway. She woke up several times each night, got out of bed, and wandered through the apartment. Liebermann snored. The Kosolapich's grandfather clock ticked. The professor, at the end, was just as quiet as by day, and the very end of the corridor only held dim darkness. Only under Matvei Alexandrovich's door did she sometimes spy a small shaft of light, and a few times she had been tempted to gently knock on his door, since they might as well pass the time together if they were both awake. Of course, she hadn't knocked. She'd been too afraid that he might misunderstand her intentions, that she might misunderstand her own intentions. So she remained alone. And she was tired of being alone. She wanted to drink wine and fondled someone's hairy chest, but there were barely any men in this country. It didn't matter which way you looked, only women. At the museum, 2 men worked alongside 13 women, and that wasn't necessarily a bad thing since she preferred dealing with women, but she didn't want to be surrounded by them forever and spend every night lying between her mother, daughter, and granddaughter. The water stain on the ceiling had turned the colour of mud. In the beginning, this room had meant freedom to her. She had moved in with Boris and away from his parents. They had been assigned to this room, and barely 1 year later, Janka had arrived. They'd been happy here for a few years. Then her father had died and her mother had moved in. Maria turned her head towards the couch where every night Varvara lay like a corpse, wheezing gently and smiling in her sleep. Closed, bright eyelids, lips gently parted.
Are you sick? Why are you lying in bed?
Varvara Mikhailovna yanked aside the curtain. I'm not lying in bed, Mother. I'm lying on the bed.
You should have put on your dressing gown. You're lying on Janka's bed in street clothes.
Yes.
Are you depressed?
No.
A woman your age shouldn't wear a skirt that short.
My skirt isn't short, and I'm not old.
You're almost 60.
I'm 45. Varvara Mikhailovna sat down on the bed next to her daughter.
You're right to suffer, right you are. Good things we have each other. Good things you have me. Good things we'll always have each other. We'll always be together. Won't we?
She rocked back and forth and emphasized each sentence with a sigh, and then she bent down to her daughter.
You'll never leave me, will you?
Maria Nikolaevna sighed with her, then sat up, rubbed her forehead, moved her head as if shaking something off, and said sternly, "Enough of this. It's enough." Yanka came into the room with Krushka on her shoulders and a pile of laundry in her arms. She put the laundry on the dresser and Krushka on the ground, took off Krushka's pyjamas, sniffed at them, folded them and put them on Krushka's bed. Yanka was so tired. She looked as if she could barely stand. She dressed the child in a clean shirt, woolen tights and a wool dress. She combed Krushka's hair and tied her thin braids together with white tulle ribbons. Varvara Mikhailovna stood up, absent-mindedly stroked Maria's hair as if to apologize, inspected the laundry and sorted other people's items into a second pile. Maria knew she would have to hurry, so Krushka wouldn't be late for kindergarten and Yanka could finally get to sleep after her night shift. Varvara was picking up fluff from the carpet. Everywhere she looked, she saw dust, dirt, grime. Maria breathed in and out heavily and noticed that when she inhaled, there was a small stabbing pain in her chest, the left. She breathed in deeply again and the pain grew, this time on the right. It wasn't a stabbing pain anymore, but an ache. She had read that spells of dizziness precede heart attacks, and this thought made her heart beat faster, and she stopped breathing. Her heartbeat pounded, vanished for a moment, and then returned. Maria pinched her hand. Yanka darted a stern glance at her. "I'd best get going," said Maria, but didn't get up. "How was the night shift, Yanka?" "Same as usual." Yanka put the teacups, which had been standing around since yesterday, on the tray. "I should take over your night shifts. I didn't manage to sleep a wink anyway." Yanka fluffed up a pillow. "A great darkness lies before me." Varvara Mikhailovna picked up the tray with the teacups.
Our Yanka speaking in riddles again.
"By the way, Krushka coughed all night."
I didn't hear her cough.
"Well, that's because you sleep like the dead, Mother. People who aren't sensitive have deep, sound sleep."
Maria, won't you be late for work?
"Last night, I thought that this year we should go to the sea, the four of us, on holiday." Varvara Mikhailovna looked pityingly at her daughter.
What ideas you have!
Yanka loosened the towel around her head, dried off her hair, picked up the pile of stray laundry, and left.